Today I'm going to be showing you how to remove and then reinstall a crankset on a Campagnolo group set. Now there are two different systems of cranksets in the Campagnolo line. There's an older system called Power Torque and then the newest system called Ultra Torque. This is going to work on those Ultra Torque crankset. And this system has been used in virtually all Campagnolo cranksets since the last 15 or so years. Good chances are this is going to work for you on your bike. The Power Torque system is similar but a little bit different, so you may have to look for a different video in order to remove that crankset. It's a pretty straightforward job, and I'm going to show you exactly what tools you need, and then I'm going to show you how to do it. Let's get into it. Okay, tools in order of appearance. First thing you're going to need is a set of needle nose pliers. These are going to be to remove the retaining clip that keeps the crankset secured to the bike. And then you're going to need some sort of 10mm hex driver. An L handle like this one from Park Tool. This is a very long 10mm. You can get something like a T handle like this one, or you can just use, a standard hex key or a socket on a breaker bar, just something with a 10mm hex end. And then finally, we're gonna need a torque wrench, one that goes up to at least 42 Newton meters or 31 foot-pounds in order to properly torque down the crankset when we reinstall it. And then obviously a 10mm socket to go along with our torque wrench. And then one little top tip, and I've actually shown this tip already in a different video on my channel. I'll post it. I always forget, I gotta use my left hand. I'll post it up here. And basically it's a tip on how to remove stuck crank bolts. This has been really useful for me on dub crankset bolts. For some reason, those seem to get really stuck on there. I haven't needed to use it on my bike, my Campagnolo bike, but you may need to. So I'm gonna show you the tip just in case you're having a hard time getting the crank bolt off. And what we're gonna need to do this little hack is a folding step stool, like this one right here. Now, you don't need your step stool to be super tall. This one's 15 inches or right around there. You could also use a block of wood. I found the step stool to be a little bit easier. A lot of people have them laying around the house already. And it's gonna allow you to get more leverage on the crank bolt just in case it's having a hard time coming unstuck. Obviously, this is optional. If you can get it off without the step stool, then that's even better. But if you're having a hard time, the step stool will do the trick. So let me show you how to remove a Campagnolo crankset, and then I'll show you how to reinstall it on your bike properly. All right, now here we are at the crankset, and the first thing we need to do is remove this retaining clip. Now, it's right here behind the crankset, and it clips onto the bottom bracket shell. It's a little bit difficult to see, so I'm gonna see if I can get the camera swung around just a minute here. But essentially, just using your needle nose pliers, you're going to grab onto the little pin right here, or clip, and then just kind of pull it out of the way, and it'll make sense once you get in there. There's two attachment points, one here and one about 180 degrees on the other side. And you basically just need to get in there and just pry it out like this. Now we gotta take our 10mm hex, and way down deep inside there is going to be a 10mm bolt. Because it's so far in there, you're really gonna need something with quite a long kind of head or extension here. So if you're using a socket and a ratchet, you're probably gonna want some sort of extension, but it's pretty much all the way in the middle of the bottom bracket shell. So you're just gonna go ahead and slide this in there, make sure you're fully engaged on the bolt there, and then we just need to loosen it. Now this is on there pretty tight, like I said, about 42 Newton meters or 31 foot-pounds. And so you may have some difficulty with doing it on the bike stand. Now, really the ideal way to do this is to sort of get the opposite crank arm kind of even with the chainstay. That gives you a little bit of an easier grip. And then you just have to put some power down through it and it should come loose. Now, as you can see, that came off pretty easily for me, actually. I was just holding the opposite crank arm and I really didn't have to put that much power into it. But that's because I just recently took this apart and maintained it, re-greased the threads, and so it's in good condition. If you're working on a bike that hasn't been touched in a while, a new bike to you that you don't know who was working on it last, let me show you a quick trick in order to get this off if you're having a hard time. So the first thing we need to do is take the bike out of the bike stand, and we're just gonna place it on the ground like this. So now we're gonna grab our step stool and we're just gonna set it up like this, okay? Next thing is we're going to basically place our pedal on the step stool here. And again, this is on the non-drive side. So we're just gonna go ahead and place our pedal on the step stool like this, and this should also actually hold the bike for us. Now, what we're essentially doing here with the step stool is preventing the crankset from spinning when we're putting pressure onto the bolt on the other side. With the step stool here, this will prevent the crankset from actually turning the other direction, which is what it's going to want to do, and it'll allow you to put more torque through the crankset. And this tip is going to really work for any crankset that has a bolt like this or a similar bolt on the other side. So, top tip. So now what we would do is we would take our 10 millimeter, just the same, put it in there, and then when we put some power through it, the crankset's not going to spin at all, and we can really easily loosen this guy up. All right, and now that we have the crank bolt loose, we can just go ahead and loosen it up the rest of the way. And there we go, one crank bolt removed. So now the crankset is actually free to be removed. So before we do that, we want to make sure to remove the chain tension. So we're going to shift down into our smallest chainring. I should have done that at the beginning, but it doesn't really matter too much. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. And then I'm just going to put a little bit of slack on the chain, and we're just going to take it off the chainring like so. Now we can just go ahead and remove our crankset. It's just pressed in there. You can do either side first. I'm doing the drive side first. There we go, drive side and non-drive side. And then be mindful of any washers or spacers you may have. Make sure you keep track of where they go. So for example, I have a wavy washer here on the non-drive side. I'm gonna make sure that I put it on in the same way. And here's what that clip looks like when you have the crankset removed. It's a little bit easier to see without the crankset in the way. So essentially you have two identical little pins right here that fit into these small holes in the bottom bracket cup, and you basically just pull one out, and then once it's loose, the other one comes out relatively easily, just like so. And then when you reinstall the crankset, obviously you're first going to put the crankset back on, and then you want to reinstall the clip. So what you basically just want to do is get one side started first, and then when that is installed, you're then just going to take your needle nose pliers and locate the hole on the second half, and there you go. Once it's in there, you are good to go, and this prevents the crankset from working its way loose. All right, so we've got the crankset off the bike, and we're gonna reinstall it in just one moment here. But before we do that, I wanna show you a couple cool things about this Campagnolo Ultra Torque system that makes it a little bit unique from SRAM or Shimano or other types of systems. Campagnolo uses something called a hearth joint on their spindle here, as you can see. So basically, rather than having one continuous spindle, one piece, it's actually two pieces connected by what's called a hearth joint or hearth coupling, which is essentially what these interfacing teeth are. Now, hearth joints are really pretty cool, actually. They're incredibly strong, right? They're used in turbine engines and stuff like that, and they're self-centering. Now, this downside is that they're much more expensive to manufacture, which is part of the reason why Campagnolo stuff is more expensive, because they use kind of more unique engineering things such as this. Is this going to be noticeably different on the bike? Campagnolo will say yes, SRAM or Shimano will say no, but it is kind of a unique system. The other cool thing about Campagnolo is the fact that the bearings for the bottom bracket are actually pressed onto the crankset rather than in the bottom bracket cups that are on the frame. This is really sort of like the main reason people complain about Campagnolo, right? They say, oh, you need all these special tools to work on it. And you do for this specific thing, right? In order to remove the bearing, to change it out, you need a puller, which comes in a set, and then a press, which presses it back on. Now the whole set, I believe it's about $95 or $100. So yeah, you know, it is a specialized tool that you're really just gonna use for this. But I will push back on that a little bit in that if you want to replace bottom bracket bearings, not the cups, but the bearings on any other sort of bike, you're going to need special tools as well. And they're probably going to cost you about $100 between a press and something to extract the bearing. In terms of replacing the bearings on the crankset, it's really about the same as SRAM or Shimano. It's just that if you already have stuff for SRAM or Shimano, it's not going to help you for Campagnolo. So I can see why people might get frustrated, but it is really kind of a unique system. The idea here is, again, that you just replace the bearing rather than throw throwing out the entire cup. Okay, so we're ready to put the crankset back on the bike, and the final thing we want to do before we can put it back on the bike and torque it down is we want to put some sort of anti-seize on this fixing bolt here. Grease will work, okay, so just your standard bike grease. This is bio grease from Muck-Off. Something I don't understand about Muck-Off products, so you know, their dry lube is something that I use quite frequently. It's kind of my favorite dry weather lube, and then obviously this is their bio grease. Call me crazy. These smell really good. Like, this smells like bananas, and this one smells, I don't know what it smells like, but it smells good. So I don't know why they do that, because like, I know you shouldn't, but it makes me want to eat it. I don't know why Muck-Off makes their stuff smell good, if it's on purpose or not, I don't know, but it does smell good. Tangent over. Grease is obviously a good option. However, a better option would be something like copper paste or copper anti-seize. When you're doing like metals together, you really want to minimize the chance of corrosion, and this sort of copper paste is meant exactly for that purpose. So this is what I'm going to use, but if you only have grease, that's okay, it's going to work. It's better than doing nothing at all, right? And if you have old gunked up grease, remove it, put some new grease on, that's going to work just fine, especially if you don't let the bike sit for 10 years. This is just going to be a little bit better. All we're going to do is we're going to take our fixing bolt here, and I'm just going to take this copper grease or copper paste and just place a little bit on the threads. A little bit goes a long way. You don't need to slather it on there, just kind of the tops of the threads, because then as you tighten it, it's going to sort of work its way down to the bottom threads. Do whatever you need to do, you know, replace your chain rings, replace your bearing here, clean everything, whatever you need to do that, and then let's go back to the bike and reinstall the crankset. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to reinstall the non-drive side crank arm. And it's just going to kind of push in there from the other side, make sure that it spins freely, that it's, you know, pressed in there correctly. Then we're gonna take our drive side crank arm and we're gonna just make sure that it is 180 degrees from the non-drive side so that it matches up properly. There we go. And we can just go ahead and place our chain back on here. And then we just take our fixing bolt and we're going to slide it into here. Then we're just gonna grab our torque wrench, set it to 31 foot-pounds or 42 Newton meters. And we're just gonna give this guy a snugging up. And then the final thing we need to do is just reinstall our retaining clip. And I find it easier to start with the top hole. So get that placed in there. And then you can sort of swing down to the bottom. And there we go. Well, that's it. We removed our Campagnolo Ultra Torque crankset. We did a little lesson on what's unique about it, talked about that a little bit. And then we reinstalled it and properly torqued it down. Our bike is ready to go ride. I hope the video was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing to the channel, drop me a like down below, leave me a comment, all that good stuff. It would really help me out. Thank you so much for watching once again. I'll catch you guys in the next video. See you later.